Dust rose like ghosts as a lone rider traced the rim of Red Mesa at dawn. The narrator watched Ethan Cole keep his eyes low and his hand near the worn holster. Ethan said, "Track split. Someone wanted me looking left." Wind hissed over yucca blades like a warning. A nigri is showing duffers. Far below, tin roofs in Dry Willow flashed like fish scales. Ethan said, "Noah should have been here by sunup." A hawk turned slow spirals over the gulch. Silence felt hunted. The first shot came flat and mean, chipping red stone at his boot. Ethan said, "Show your face, Victor, or send better snakes." Another shot rang from the cottonwoods, and a third from the shale shelf. The echoes braided into panic. Ethan slid behind a boulder and counted breaths. He tasted iron and old fear. Ethan said, "I won't die on a lie." Horses thumped beyond the ridge, where dust thickened to a curtain. The ambush had patience, and patience had teeth. The gulch swallowed the echoes, but doubt stayed, riding his spine like a cold spur. Ethan slid downslope through sage and shale, measuring each footfall and each breath. Ethan said, "They knew the ridge, they knew my time." Dry Willow's main street yawned ahead, empty as a church at midnight. A faded poster with Ethan's name flapped, and then lay still. He felt memory press like a bruise. Ethan said, "Noah, where in blazes are you?" A shutter clicked in an upstairs window and closed again, polite as a lie. The well rope creaked in rhythm with the wind. He tied his horse behind the livery and stepped into thin shade. Ethan said, "Trust costs blood here." The sun lifted higher and burned away excuses. Somewhere a hammer struck iron, and the sound counted sins. He swallowed grit and kept walking. Noah Reyes waited in the alley behind the assay office with fear chewing his lip. He held a telegram that smelled of dust and sweat. Noah said, "I sent word at dawn. Ethan, I swear it." The narrator saw guilt sparking off the paper like static. A bootstep scraped near the water trough. Noah tucked the message and forced his shoulders still. Noah said, "If Marshal Harrow asked, I never saw you." A cat slid between crates like a rumor. The town's heartbeat slowed to listen. Noah drew a breath that tried to be brave and failed halfway. He studied the alley mouth as if courage might arrive there. Noah said, "I can fix this if you just show." The paper in his hand trembled like a leaf that would not fall. Marshal Victor Harrow stood in the doorway of the jail with polish on his boots and dust on his smile. He watched the street like a banker watches the ledger. Victor said, "Open hands, closed town." The keys on his belt chimed a slow hymn. He folded a note that smelled of gun oil and lilac. Victor said, "Move the riders to the north wash. Let the trail breathe." The narrator felt the town lean toward his orders. He enjoyed a silence that other men had to buy. Victor said, "Ethan will come thirsty. Offer him law first." A clock ticked without hurry. He turned his badge to catch the sun and grinned at the glint. The grin did not reach his eyes, where winter lived all year. In the livery's dim, Jedediah Kane sat sharpening a memory across a whetstone. The blade sang a thin song of better days. Jedediah said, "You felt the trap, boy." He lifted his eyes and saw road miles stamped into Ethan's face. Horses breathed slow thunder in their stalls. Jedediah said, "Victor sets snares like a preacher sets hymns." The narrator sensed history between them like smoke that never cleared. Ethan did not sit. He stood in the doorway and let the dust fall off his hat brim. Ethan said, "Noah missed the meat." Jedediah kept the stone moving in patient circles. Jedediah said, "No mistake lasts alone in this town." A nail popped in the rafters, and both men glanced up as if the roof might confess. The road into Dry Willow was no place for peace, but Ethan rode it anyway, with Noah's horse trailing close. The narrator felt the town watching long before faces showed. Ethan said, "Eyes on us, keep your hands steady." Noah's fingers brushed his holster, though he lacked the callus for steel. The dust clung to coats and caught the sun in long gold streaks. A bell rang once, sharp as warning. Ethan said, "Town smells fear like vultures smell rot." The boardwalk creaked as a shop door swung and shut. Children hushed inside windows, leaving curtains to move like breath. Noah said, "Maybe they just want quiet." Ethan laughed without mirth. He knew quiet here meant silence bought by someone's blood. In the saloon doorway stood Clara Monroe, her dress finer than the town deserved. The piano had long stopped, leaving her voice to claim the silence. Clara said, "Stranger or sinner, you look the same here." Ethan paused, dust sliding from his boots like confession. Noah shifted, his eyes drawn to her like moths to flame. The narrator felt every patron lean back to watch without moving. Ethan said, "I'm just thirsty, not buying judgment." Clara's eyes flashed secrets and regret in the same breath. She stepped aside, but her smile bent like a blade half-sheathed. The saloon's air soured with whiskey and threat as Victor's men spread across tables. One leaned heavy, tapping a revolver butt against the wood like a clock. Ethan said, "Guess you boys still play watchdog." The man's grin was rotten with power. Noah touched his glass but did not drink. Clara lingered, her eyes cutting between predator and prey. The narrator caught tension snapping like wires under strain. Victor's name hung unspoken, yet every boot in the room seemed to wear it. Ethan said, "If he wants words, he can fetch me himself." The answer came in laughter sharp enough to scar. Jedediah Kane leaned against the saloon rail, sharpening words more than knives. His voice rasped like dry timber. Jedediah said, "Fists and guns right fast, Ethan, but ink of regret stays longer." The room quieted, his age enough to command ears. Ethan studied him, measuring the weight of wisdom and weariness. Noah shifted, uncomfortable under lessons not aimed at him. Jedediah said, "Victor grins when boys run hot, but he bleeds when men wait cold." The narrator saw Ethan's silence shape into stubborn resolve, a shape Jedediah recognized and feared. Marshal Victor Harrow entered with the law trailing like iron chains. The doors swung wide, sunlight cutting the smoke. Victor said, "Town drinks easier when I pour." His boots struck boards like sermons. The patrons stiffened, their silence an offering. Ethan's jaw tightened, words coiled like rattlers. Victor said, "Red Mesa's got dust that doesn't settle, and I see it on your boots." The narrator felt the room shrink as law turned weapon. Noah shifted, caught between admiration and dread. Clara's eyes narrowed, her silence louder than any gun. The freight yard at dawn smelled of tar and stale promise. Ethan waited by a boxcar where paint peeled like old lies. "How?" Noah stood near the coupler, trying to look steady. Ethan said, "We talk first, then we walk." Footsteps scraped grit into the quiet. Two of Victor's men came smiling, the way wolves smile. The taller one said, "Harrow offers peace if you ride out by noon." The narrator felt the lie twitch before it breathed. Ethan said, "Peace doesn't carry rifles under coats." A train bell clanged far down the line like a warning that woke late. Noah said, "We can end this without blood." The wolves laughed and reached for steel, disguised as courtesy. Ethan saw the move and let the hope die. The first shot split a lantern and sprayed fire across the gravel. Panic ran faster than sense. Ethan pivoted and fired once, then again measured as a metronome. Noah ducked behind the coupling and choked on smoke. The narrator saw courage arrive late and pay full fare. A horse screamed beyond the fence and irons sang as the wind caught tin. Ethan said, "Fall back to the water tower." Boots hammered a rhythm, older than law. One thug went down, red seeping into ballast. Noah said, "I can cover left." Ethan said, "Cover yourself first." The yard filled with echoes that had teeth. Noah broke from cover too soon, chasing a shadow he thought was retreat. The narrator counted 3 heartbeats between mistake and penalty. He slipped on spilled oil and sent his shot wild. A bystander teamster rose from under a wagon, startled into fate. The stray round tore a board, and splinters blinded the man into open fire. Ethan shouted, "Down, right now!" The hired gun took the gift and lined a clean shot. Noah froze, caught between pride and fear. Jedediah's rifle cracked from the alley, and bent destiny a fraction. Even mercy left bruises that would not fade. Clara found Ethan behind the cooper's shed, where barrels held the smell of rain that never came. Her dress carried dust like a secret. Clara said, "Victor will squeeze Noah until he breaks." Ethan stared at the ground as if answers might sprout. She touched his sleeve, then pulled back as if burned. Clara said, "I did a thing once he never forgave." The narrator heard truth try to climb through the thorns of pride. Ethan said, "What does he hold over you?" She watched the alley mouth as shadows lengthened. Clara said, "A letter. And a grave with the wrong name." Hope leaned in, and then lost its nerve. Jedediah met Ethan by the dry creek where reeds rattled like bones. His coat hung looser than last winter, but his eyes cut clean. Jedediah said, "Boy, revenge is a stove that eats its own fire." Ethan kept still while the wind tried on different tempers. Jedediah said, "Teach Noah to breathe before he shoots, or dig him a short grave." The narrator felt the choice put on weight. Ethan said, "Victor won't stop unless I stop him." Jedediah looked toward town where the badge glinted like a lie. Jedediah said, "Then stop the man, not the world." Stones clicked under boots like small verdicts. Marshal Victor Harrow sat in his office while the badge glimmered in lamplight, more shield than honor. He wrote orders in neat strokes, each word heavy with control. Victor said, "Send riders north, choke the wells, let him crawl thirsty." His deputy nodded, blind to the cost. Victor leaned back, boots polished and cruel, eyes narrowing toward the window. The narrator felt power weigh on silence, turning law into a blade. Victor said, "Ethan won't slip the leash. If he runs into dust." The wind rattled the shutters, carrying a whisper of storms. In the back room of the saloon, Clara whispered with a ranch foreman loyal to Victor. A single lantern swayed, painting suspicion on every surface. Clara said, "If Ethan walks into that pass, he won't walk out." The foreman sneered, sliding coins across the table. The narrator heard betrayal grinding like teeth in the dark. Clara's hands shook, but her eyes remained steel. She said, "Then you don't know him. He doesn't die neat." The coins clinked louder than gunfire, sealing a quiet pact of treachery. Shadows lengthened, swallowing her hesitation whole. Noah walked with Ethan along the corral, moonlight drawing silver lines across the rails. "Noah said you fight storms like fists, but I can't breathe in thunder." His words carried the crack of doubt. Ethan kept his stride steady, jaw locked like a gate. The narrator saw a boy's faith collapse under the weight of fear. Ethan said, "Doubt gets men buried quick." Noah looked away, eyes fixed on horses restless in the night. He whispered, "Maybe I'm already buried." Silence stretched until it split like old wood. Ethan's shadow moved ahead, leaving Noah trailing further behind. Near the canyon edge, Ethan and Jedediah crouched, while dust drifted like smoke from unseen fires. Ethan said, "They're circling, waiting for me to blink." Jedediah adjusted his rifle, slow and calm. Jedediah said, "Patience is teeth sharper than steel." The narrator felt danger coiling just beyond the rocks. Hoofbeats rumbled faint but certain. Ethan's hand flexed on his revolver grip, a storm caged in flesh. Jedediah said, "Don't give them your fear, give them their own." The canyon wind cut sharp, carrying echoes of hidden guns cocked in the dark. Clara appeared at Ethan's side in the alley behind the mercantile, her voice cracked by urgency. Clara said, "Victor means to strike tonight at the North Wash. He wants you dead by dawn." Ethan studied her eyes, weighing truth against old lies. The narrator felt betrayal, breathed heavy in the dark. Ethan said, "Why warn me now?" Clara turned away, face veiled in shadow. She said, because even snakes don't like the fire they start. The air smelled of storm, and footsteps closed in around the alley mouth. Ethan's revolver hand found its place without thought. Ethan found the church basement hollow with secrets, dust rising in beams of moonlight. On the altar lay a ledger stained with old blood. He opened it and felt years crack open like bones. Ethan said, "This is no prayer, this is a tally." Each name scratched in Victor's hand, men buried without witness. The narrator saw his jaw set like stone. Ethan said, "My father, my brother," both crossed off like cattle. His breath caught but did not break. Noah entered, eyes wide, seeing pages that cut deeper than knives. Ethan closed the book, and silence weighed heavier than thunder. Victor stood in the banker's office, shadows swallowing half his face. He traced a map with one finger, marking wells and roads. Victor said, "This land breathes my name, and none drink without my hand." The narrator caught the hunger in his voice. A gospel of power. He tapped a circle over Red Mesa, then smiled as if carving graves with ink. Victor said, "Ethan thinks it's vengeance, but it's business." He folded the map, tucking Empire into his coat. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains like drums for war. Noah's boots scuffed gravel in the dark pass as he met Victor's riders. Fear made his hand shake, but pride held it steady enough to pass a note. Noah said, "This is where Ethan waits, North Ridge by dawn." The narrator felt betrayal gnaw like rust on young iron. The riders smirked, clapping his back as if he were kin. Noah's face turned pale with the weight of what he sold. He whispered to the night, "I'll make it right later." The lie curdled even as it left his lips. The canyon held no forgiveness in its echo. Jedediah sat by the campfire, flames carving deep lines across his scarred cheek. Ethan stood across from him, fists clenched, betrayal already a wound. Jedediah said, "I rode with Victor once, and I walked away soaked in sin." Ethan's eyes narrowed, every word a knife. Jedediah said, "Your father's death was ink in his ledger and blood on my boots." The narrator felt silence split wide as mountains. Ethan said, "Why speak it now?" Jedediah looked into the fire, voice low. Jedediah said, "Because secrets rot faster than bodies, and mine stinks enough." Clara waited in the saloon loft, dress torn at the hem, hair undone. She whispered into the dark, her words meant for Ethan but poisoned by fear. Clara said, "I told Victor where you'd ride, but I swear I tried to turn it back." The narrator felt her voice fracture like glass. Ethan stepped from shadow, revolver low but trust higher than the rafters. He said, "You played both sides, and now both sides will bleed." Clara's eyes shimmered with regret and defiance. She said, "Then let me burn with the truth, not drown in his lies." Lightning flashed through the window, splitting night into judgment. Dawn scraped a pale line across Dry Willow as Ethan stepped into the street where dust held its breath. Victor faced him with the badge bright and the heart darker than coal. Victor said, "You draw, I bury town sleeps." The clock over the bank ticked like a gallows rope. Ethan said, "You wrote my family into that ledger, now write your own name." Windows lifted inches, fear peeking like mice. Victor's hand hovered, sermon steady, mercy missing. The narrator felt time thin to a single thread, ready to snap. The first move was a glance, then steel flashed like lightning. 2 shots cracked, and echoes ran for the hills while both men stayed on their feet. Victor smiled a thin smile that promised later sins. Riders spilled from the north wash as Noah scrambled to swing the water tower valve. He wanted cover, not ruin, but desire outran judgment. Noah said back, "I can blind them with the flood." The wheel shrieked and locked, then burst loose like a broken oath. Torrent slammed the yard, sweeping crates and men into a grinding tumble. Ethan shouted, "Hold your ground," but the ground had turned to a river. The narrator heard panic praying in every boot step. A stray shot struck a lantern, and fire skated the water like a devil's trick. Noah said, I only meant to help, but help had teeth now. Smoke and steam wrapped the street in choking cloth and stole names. From the smoke a rifle cracked clean, a sound with a signature. Ethan turned toward the alley, too slow for the bullet coming. Jedediah stepped between fate and its mark with emotion older than fear. Jedediah said, "Owe the world one honest deed," and the impact folded him like a closing book. The narrator felt the town tilt as if truth had weight. Ethan caught him before the dust did. Jedediah said, "Stop the man, not the wind," breath thinning to a thread. He tried to smile and almost made it. Ethan said, "I hear you," though the words broke. Another shot chewed brick nearby, reminding grief that death is rarely patient. Red Mesa waited like a jury as Ethan tracked Victor to the rim where wind carved knives. The ledger's pages fluttered from Victor's coat like wounded birds. Victor said, "Town stands because I hold it up." Ethan said, "It kneels because you press your boot." The narrator felt the world narrow to breath and gunmetal. Stones slid, choosing sides. Victor stepped left into a shadow that remembered the first ambush. Ethan saw the angle and did not blink. Two shots traded truths no preacher could redeem. The wind caught one hat and hurled it into the gulf, as if choosing which man would keep a name. Clara reached the rim with breath like broken glass, a pistol small in a shaking hand. She saw Ethan bleeding and Victor steady, and chose a wound over silence. Clara said, "He doesn't own my name anymore." The shot she fired drew Victor's aim like iron finds lodestone. The narrator watched courage meet cost without bargaining. Ethan stepped, but the world moved faster. Clara took the round meant to finish the ledger and folded as gently as a dress on a chair. She said, "Burn the letter, barely more than air." The wind carried her words over the drop and returned only echo. Red Mesa held its breath after the gunfire, and the wind seemed afraid to speak first. Ethan knelt where Clara fell, the letter warm from her palm in the sun. Ethan said, "I'll keep this promise." Victor staggered near the rim, anger wearing the shape of faith. Victor said, "You think names on paper can unmake a town?" The narrator felt grief harden into purpose without turning to stone. Noah climbed the slope, guilt filling the space courage left empty. Noah said, "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it right." Ethan rose with the ledger and the letter, heavier than iron. He said, "We carry them down, and we carry the truth with them." The Mesa gave back only silence that would not forget. Dry Willow gathered on the hill beyond the cottonwoods, where fresh earth waited. Jedediah's hat lay folded like a prayer, and Clara's ribbon tied the wind to the moment. The preacher spoke, but the town listened to boots shifting and hearts counting debts. Ethan said, "They stood between us and the dark." Noah stared at the graves as if they stared back. Noah said, "I gave Victor the road, and they paid the toll." The narrator felt mercy reach for him, slow but certain. Ethan set the ledger atop a shovel and looked to the people who had learned to whisper. Ethan said, "We stop whispering now." A quiet murmur rose, the first sound of a spine being found. Victor stood in the jail doorway with the badge dull, and the smile gone brittle. He held the room like a tired storm and dared it to rain. Ethan laid the ledger on the desk, pages open to names the town knew by heart. Ethan said, "You used law like a rope, but ropes can slip." Victor said, "Order is a hard mercy." Noah stepped forward, voice shaking but clear. Noah said, "I carried his message, and men died for it." The narrator felt the scale tilt when truth stopped asking permission. Ethan thumbed back his hammer, then eased it down. Ethan said, "You answer a lie." Outside a crowd exhaled, as if the town tried on daylight. Evening found Ethan by the creek, where reeds remembered old wind. He held Clara's letter and watched the match flare like a sunrise that chose to be brief. Ethan said, "Rest easy." The paper curled and lifted ash like small birds learning to leave. Noah waited a step back, not asking to be forgiven, only to be useful. Noah said, "Teach me to breathe before I shoot." The narrator heard Jedediah in the spaces between the words. Ethan nodded, the lesson already a vow. Ethan said, "We start with listening to the quiet, then to the fear, then to the truth." The last ember fell into water and went home as steam. Morning rose clean over the desert, and Dry Willow sounded different, like a room after someone opens a window. Victor sat behind bars counting hours he once sold. The town set its shoulders, lighter but not careless. Noah said, "I'll stay and mend what I broke." Ethan cinched his saddle and looked down the road that had never promised kindness. Ethan said, "Keep the ledger safe and your words safer." The narrator watched him ride toward a horizon that did not change, only forgave distance. The trail took him into light that did not boast, and the dust did not argue.